Good day. Canadian Anti-Semitism Education Foundation's web talk is there justice for Jews in Europe? With our special guest, Sasha Reitman-Dratwa. I'm Andrea Spindle, Executive Director of CAEF, which is a registered Canadian charity that over the past 2 years has been focusing on anti-Semitism, that is anti-Zionism. That is the attempt to discredit Zionism, to link it with racism, to deny its foundational aspect to the Jewish people, and the fact that Zionism is inherent in Judaism and not merely a political movement. It is not an idea that originated just pre-World War II or is justified by World War II, but rather it is as old as the Torah itself and as important to most Jews as Torah. It is the recognition of Jews as a people, that Israel is our national homeland, and that Jews are indigenous to Israel and, as well, have historical and legal rights to the land of Israel. In educating about anti-Semitism, CAEF has been doing webinars and organizing virtual events with partners, such as those we thank today for co-sponsoring this event: the International Christian Embassy, Jerusalem, Adat Israel Synagogue, the Lawfare Project, Americans for a Safe Israel, Canadians for Israel's Legal Rights, the Combat Anti-Semitism Movement, and End Jew Hatred Canada, of which CAEF is the lead partner. CAEF also responds to specific incidents of Jew hatred, provides a weekly bulletin to our members, and cooperates on projects with many partners. To continue our work, we need your financial support, so please make a donation by going to our website and clicking on the donate button. Simply go to www.caef.ca. We are very proud to have been an early signatory to the pledge to combat anti-Semitism that was created by the Combat Anti-Semitism Movement, or CAM. And we encourage all Jewish and non-Jewish organizations in Canada to sign up and individuals to take the pledge. We are very appreciative of opportunities to work with CAM and acknowledge the foresight of the movement's founder and its 2 key personnel for demonstrating terrific leadership by being collaborative and innovative. It's now my pleasure to introduce our guest, who has been monitoring worldwide attacks against Jews for almost 2 years now. So he might be even more distressed than I am. But on the other hand, he has successfully set down strong roots for peace and understanding, starting with establishing important relationships with many government bodies in the US and Europe, and organizing educational summits and lectures, as well as producing fulsome reporting of both the negative incidents against Jews and the gains made to counter anti-Semitism, such as the adoption by some countries of the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance working definition of anti-Semitism. Sasha Reitman-Dratwa is the Executive Director of the Combat Anti-Semitism Movement. Prior to joining CAM, Sasha led the Digital Advocacy Unit at the World Jewish Congress. At the Congress, he led the, you might remember, #WeRemember campaign for International Holocaust Remembrance, which is the world's largest digital educational campaign. Prior to that, Sasha was the Director of Digital Media Communication for Shimon Cohen Schenkman, a leading PR firm in Israel. And earlier, he commanded the Israel Defense Forces New Media Operations Team. Sasha holds a bachelor's degree in interactive communications from the Interdisciplinary Center in Herzliya. Please note that you can submit questions using the Q&A function on Zoom. This webinar is being recorded and will be made available later this week to all who registered. Sasha, may we begin with your own story of growing up Jewish in Belgium? Tell us if your family experienced anti-Semitism, and then tell us who or what is behind the initiative to create CAM.
So first of all, thank you, Andrea, and thank you everyone for being with us today. Thank you for having me, representing the Combat Anti-Semitism Movement, an organization, a movement of 300 partner organizations and 300,000 individuals. They've joined the movement in the past 2 years. It's a great honor to work with CAEF, and in the past 2 years, we've been really trying to collaborate and working together to bring some of the activities forward and to try really to make the difference. So before I speak about my personal experience and what we do at CAM, I would just want to comment on first thing. We are not distressed at CAM. when we look at the world and the state of anti-Semitism, because we see a lot of hope as well. If it's coming from the Middle East with the Abrahamic Accords, it's from different legislation that we're going to speak about later on in Europe that things are changing. Even in the past 4 years in the US, we see a lot of change in the administration, legislation, executive orders, and a lot of tools that didn't exist 10 years ago, 5 years ago, that today exist for Jews all over the world. But we need, first of all, to recognize that they exist and to find them, and then to advocate to be more used, like the IRA definition of anti-Semitism that I assume many people know about it. And these are the tools that we have. Now we need to understand that they exist for us. Many good cooperation between Jews and non-Jews are also existing, and we need to emphasize that. We see even in Europe, the place where anti-Semitism was born. Let's not forget that anti-Semitism exists 3,000 years ago, and in the US, not even 500 years. So the place where anti-Semitism was born is also changing. So we have a lot of hope, because also it's the only way to combat hatred. If we are too negative and we forgot the good things happening, we're never going to end, and we're going to be in distress. And we need good energies to combat anti-Semitism and to be together. So just allow me to introduce myself a little bit. So I grew up in Belgium, and I was a proud Belgian Jew. Belgium, the capital of Europe, old city. And I was, first of all, a Belgian person. I love the football. I love the waffles. I love the beer. I still love the football. I still love the beer and the waffles. But something was weird, because people look at me differently. No one look at me as a Belgian Jew. They look at me as a Jew, Zionist, and then Belgium. I didn't even identify myself as Zionist, because I don't want to identify myself as Zionist. It's a part of my Jewish identity. Always. I think that the fact that we define ourselves as I'm a Zionist Jew is the first problem. When you're a Jew, you should be a Zionist. You should believe in the self-determination right of the Jewish people. So I don't like to define myself as a Zionist or not Zionist Jew. So I never defined myself as a Zionist Jew, but I was defined by my neighbors, my friends, as something a little bit different. And everything changed during the Second Intifada, when the famous picture of Mohammed al-Dura, I don't know who of you are aware of this picture. It was a picture of this really poor Palestinian kid in the Gaza border that was in a crossfiring between Hamas and the Israeli Defense Force. And he was killed. Still until today, it's not clear who killed him and why he was killed. We have a lot of report and research made that it was a fire from the Palestinian side, not the Israeli side. But this picture changed my life. People came to the school, non-Jewish school, with this picture, and they asked me, a Belgian Jew, why I did that. And I was like, who I am? I'm here. I was yesterday with you, and today I killed this Palestinian. We are friends. Say, no, but you, the Jews, you did it. I say, but I'm a Jewish person. I'm not an Israeli person even. And this is where everything changed in my mind. When I feel that this comparison between Jewish, Israelis, Zionists, and non-Israelis was made in the mind of the others. And I understood that I'm a different. And then this is where I began to be a Jewish Belgian person and not a Belgian Jewish person. So at the age of 18, I understood I was different from the Belgium. I'm not a different person, but and I moved to Israel to serve in the Israeli army. Then I served 6 years in the Israeli army. So I was able to be a proud Jewish person wearing the uniform of the Israeli army and defending my country. It was very sad for me, because I love and I still love Belgium. My family is still there. But the way that people look at you as a Jewish person, they don't recognize that you belong to the same society they belong, was very difficult for me to accept. When I'm looking at my family today in Europe, that they sometimes hide their identity, the mezuzah at the entrance of their house, it's very hard for me to see that. When I see that they change their name for business purpose, because they don't want to be recognized as Jews, because they will believe that people will not do business with them, is very difficult for me to see. And this is why I'm dedicating my life to who I am. I'm a grandson of Holocaust survivors. And I think that we deserve, for the memory of those that perished in the Holocaust, to combat. When we see the numbers, that people don't know what Auschwitz was, they don't know to mention even one name or two names of death camp during the Holocaust. It's 75 years after the Holocaust. It's a big problem, and we need to fight. This is our fight, and this is what I'm doing every day. So this was a little bit about myself. I had the chance to live in New York for many years. Now I'm living back in Israel with my wife and my child. And 2 years ago, a bit less, I had a chance to get engaged in the combat anti-Semitism movement to build something different. So to your question, Andrea, what we do, we try to be different. We try to understand that we don't have all the solutions to combat anti-Semitism. And those that pretend they know it's a big problem because for 3,000 years, no one succeeded really. So first of all, we need to accept that we don't have all the solutions, but where the solutions are, and this is the big question that we ask ourselves at CAM. The solutions are by working together, Jews and non-Jews. And this is why we are building a movement of individuals and organizations, but also an interfaith movement, Jews, Muslims, Christians, and people adherents of other faiths. So we're working toward building a coalition, grassroots also activism with a lot of people that just want to express and work with us. We're doing a lot of advocacy and diplomatic work. I'm gonna present it to you in a few minutes. The big project that we're working on taking the battle of anti-Semitism to the streets by working with mayors across the globe. We're launching next week in March 16 the big mayor summit against anti-Semitism with mayors from Canada, Lithuania, Belgium, United States, Portugal, and Spain, and many other countries. So we really try to develop a lot of tools, a lot of projects to work together.
Thank you. I'm going to get into some of that. But just before I do, if you wouldn't mind, Sasha, I've received word that there may be Holocaust survivors that have joined us today who are actually in France. And you mentioned your grandparents were survivors, and I know you speak French. So maybe you could just send a greeting to those folks who are watching.
Non, pour tous les francophones et les Français qui se joignent avec nous aujourd'hui, pardon, bienvenue et j'espère qu'on aura vraiment une très bonne discussion ce soir. Et si vous avez des questions, vous pouvez les poser sur le chat et c'est avec un grand plaisir. Donc, merci d'être venu ce soir.
Thank you. And I appreciate that they've been in touch and have expressed interest in this topic, particularly because, as you said, there's been a lot of anti-Semitism in Europe and they're living it. And let me just give you a quote and get your reaction. While you've spoken about the positive, this came out on March the 7th from IsraelUnwired.com. You're probably familiar with that website. And the quote is, attack after attack in France, in the rest of Europe, America, all over, you name it. It seems never ending. Thank God no one was hurt this time, but the situation could have been devastating if the brave parent security team didn't stop the attacker and the French police didn't respond quickly. So that's very recent. That's very serious. Thank God we have not seen physical attacks in Canada. We've got online hatred and vandalism, but so far, nobody's been so seriously hurt. Can you talk a little bit about that incident and what is happening in France?
Yes. France is an interesting place because it connects the three different forms of Jewish hatred in one place. You have Jewish hatred from radical Islam with a lot of immigration that came since the World War II and even before. You have the left wing with the Communist Party and the BDS organization that are well present in the country, spreading hatred against the Zionist identity and the Jewish Zionism all the time, all over the day. And then you have the radical right anti-Semitism coming from the Front National party that is well recognized, that was almost part of the political area in the last elections with a lot of voice and almost 20% of the support in the street of France. So France is interesting because it connects everything together. Now, the danger is that in Europe, Jews are really a big minority. In United States, is a bit different. But if you go in Europe, a country like Belgium is 30,000 Jews, even less, 25,000 Jews. Depends who you ask. And the power they have is getting less important. The political force of the Jews is less important, and Jews are not being listened to, and they begin to be a minority that people don't really pay attention to in many places. In France, the Jewish community is a big Jewish community, 600,000 people, but compared to 11 million Muslim community that has bring from the Middle East a lot of Jews hatred. They didn't learn everything about Jews hatred in France, but they learn coming from different countries. And then we have the support of different financial institutions that are supporting anti-Jewish education in the street of France. And this is why we see that something is happening. The biggest problem that you have today is the gap between the communities. They don't know each other. They don't speak to each other. If you go in France, in Paris even, you will have the feeling of a ghetto when you go in a Jewish neighborhood. You have the feeling in Brussels. You have the Jewish neighborhood where Jews are living, and people are really divided. So first of all, there is a big problem. Secondly, it's a shock. We are 76 years after the Holocaust. And I will tell you something, Jews couldn't have believed that we're going to go back to these situations. So being ready for this situation, it's not something that in our mind we can understand as a human being. And the fact that it's happening, most of Jews in Jewish communities across the world and in Europe don't believe yet that this is their reality. So we see, and thanks to the police forces, that the attack was stopped because the system today in Europe has been protected the Jewish communities. We have police officers, we have the army in front of every schools. And I can give you the example of Belgium. I went, it was a year ago before the COVID-19 crisis, of course, to visit my family. And I took my nephew from the Jewish schools in Brussels, the capital of Europe. And you had an army vehicle outside of the school, patrol of military forces outside of the school, in addition to the Israeli guards keeping the school because you have the children of the embassy. And when you look at that, it is shocking. I cannot live it this way. This is why I left Belgium to live in Israel, because this is not acceptable in my opinion. This is not a reason to leave Europe. We need to stay. We need to fight for our right, fight for our history, make sure that we don't leave a country because of that. And we need to fight. It's not too late, but it's shocking. So I think that the situation today is shocking. The good side is that the authorities, local authorities, understand the problems. The number of terrorist attacks that targeted Jewish communities in Europe is big. I think that it's great that in Canada it didn't happen yet. And hopefully it's not going to happen, but the Jewish communities in Europe have confronted in the past 20 years terrible terrorist attack. In Brussels, Super Cacher in Paris, in Toulouse, many, and from all the aspects of anti-Semitism, mainly radical Islam and right wings. So we see that it's happening. The left wing never really attacked physically Jewish community. They never killed anybody in Europe, but we see them on a much more day-to-day approach of terrorizing on the communities, young people in the street. So it's happening. The good side is that a lot of legislation are being implemented in the past 5 years. I hope that it will reflect in the ground and things will change in the communities, but there is a long way to go.
It does seem like it's been many years that it's been increasing, there's been increasing anti-Semitism, and it feels as though governments until recently really ignored it. It's only very recently, I think, that Macron came out and said anything very serious about doing anything. Do you think, is there a country that has been a really good example of addressing anti-Semitism?
I think even France is a good example. Lately, they passed in the French parliament some resolution comparing anti-Zionism to anti-Semitism, accepting that, the IRA definition implemented in France. So that's the first step. Even in the European Commission, need to see the work that is being done on European level, the different reports that have been publicized, and agree by all the ministers present in the European Commission, all the representative of European countries that are all signing on. So we see a dramatic change that will impact decision makers in the country, but there is still a gap between high-level decision-making process and implementation on the ground.
Right.
This is also an approach that we have with the IRA definition that is a lot of time adopted. So we're pushing for adoption. But what does it mean once you adopt a non-legal binding definition? It doesn't mean technically anything. So you can continue to spread anti-Semitism because it's not legally binding. So the big gap that we see is really from big policies to implementation. I can mention the good policies in Germany against hate speech that are very strong, against Holocaust denial that are one of the strongest in the world. Germany has really fantastic law against BDS, the Czech Republic as well. So if you look at the map of Europe, because we're speaking about Europe today, and the legislation that have been adopted or implemented, they are fantastic. But the problem are not the legislation anymore. The problem is their implementation on the ground every day. This is what we see: educating the police officers, educating the educators. This is a big gap that we don't see. I think that in my position 20 years ago, if I had to speak about my story to someone in the educational system, no one will ever listen to me. They will even respond, yes, you're a Jewish person. You need to defend Israel. Today is not the case anymore, but it's still not done yet because the Jewish communities themselves needs to be educated about their rights. We're speaking a lot about the IRA definition, but who really understand the IRA definition of anti-Semitism? And I have a good example. The ICC investigation against Israel that it's happening right now in Hague, in Amsterdam, for crimes during the latest conflict in Gaza. Why this thing is anti-Semitism? The simple answer is on the IRA definition example, speaking about double standards. So when you have almost 30 countries that have adopted the IRA definition, we need these 30 countries to speak out against the ICC because it's under the umbrella of the double standard example of the IRA definition. And the problem that we have today that there is no implementation of IRA, at least not enough. So we are able to transition between the policy and the implementation, we can make a big change.
But there is duplicity. You've just outlined it. So countries adopt it, but they don't put in there's no legislation. They don't have an implementation plan. They don't monitor, and then they don't discipline. They don't hold anybody accountable. So is IRA the tool we want it to be, or do we need to, as advocates on the street level, community level, push for more?
So first of all, it's not exactly why they don't. They do. A lot of things are being implemented. I think that the security level of the communities today has been handled both by the national offices and both by the local offices of the police, for example. So the security level that took many years to have budget issue because someone needs to pay for that. We need to pay for that. The taxes for everyone, not the Jewish taxes in Europe. Everyone needs to pay for that. So that's the first step. Legislation was made, things were implemented, and that's a first good stage. The other good thing that it's happening is Holocaust education in Europe, which is different than in other places. It is not a question to learn about the Holocaust and how to learn about the Holocaust in most of the European countries from the Western world. If we speak about the Eastern side, we see a lot of Holocaust distortion in many places. For example, Lithuania, you go in Ukraine, you go in many countries, in Poland even, the narrative of the Holocaust has been transformed. Who are the heroes and who are the victims? And that's a big question that's happening. But in Western Europe, a lot of countries took responsibility for the Holocaust. They have Holocaust memorials, Holocaust Remembrance Day. They send the schools to the children to museums. So things are happening. What we don't see enough is, first of all, a strong interfaith relations between everyone in our societies. I hope that new immigrants coming in Europe will have an educational program meeting with all the immigrants to know how the society is built, to know each other. If you know your neighbors, the chance that you're going to hate him are much lower. So that's something that is missing in most of the European countries. I think that the second thing that we see that is missing is much more law enforcement against hate speech. Hate speech is the first step for everything. There are a lot of legislation against hate speech, but once you find someone spreading hatred until you see him accused of something to pay money, real money, because he did something bad, or to pay a price by going in jail, that's not something that we see. And I think that if I was a legislator and I would like to fight anti-Semitism, we will first of all go in hate speech, because this is the beginning. When someone spread hate, this is the beginning of moving from hate speech to actual physical act against someone. So I think that the biggest gap is hate speech, but now in policy, in law enforcement, online, offline, everywhere.
I think that what you described as the Islamist anti-Semitism and the right-wing anti-Semitism is maybe most visible. But then when you speak about free speech and you speak about education, I would ask if that's where the left-wing anti-Semitism actually becomes a danger to us, because it's in the educational system that, at least in North America, and I suspect in Europe, we're seeing a heavy influence by so-called progressives who are actually anti-Israel, anti-Zionist, anti-Semitic. Do you see that in Europe? That's if you're educating kids that, and it apparently is still happening, that the Jews killed Christ, that Israel is the enemy of humanity, how will you fight it as they become older?
So of course we see that in Europe. I think that, as I said, Europe is the birthplace of every form of hatred. But what is happening in Europe, the left wing, the hardcore left wing anti-Semitism is really anti-Zionism today. Is hiding himself against the hatred of Israel, against with the support of the Palestinian people, and how the David and Goliath narrative has changed, has been transformed. And that's something that I've confronted myself. I've seen myself, my family sees that every day. So that's happening in the street of Europe every day. I think that is also one of the most dangerous one, because it helps the two other forms of anti-Semitism to spread their hatred in a different ways. They will not really attack physically Jews like the two other forms of anti-Semitism will do, but they feel them, they give them argumentation, ideas, and they help them spreading hatred. So for me, is coming back to the same point I said before, it's about hatred. If you combat hatred, you can then stop the next step, which is physical attacks. So the left-wing anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism proper is difficult to combat. It's difficult to end because it's a political argumentation today. And this is why the IRA definition, if you ask if the proper tool, the IRA definition helps defining what is or what is not. And I think that is something that is missing today. The IRA definition is a perfect tool, but only when it moves from defining to implementing. It's very important to define what is anti-Semitism or not. You cannot, and you cannot do anything without being able to define it properly. So the first step is defining anti-Semitism, and then moving on to the other step: education, law enforcement, legislations, and making sure that all the process is being handled properly, but under the umbrella of the definition.
It's certainly at CAF, we would agree with you. And I think that's where the battle is to get more levels of government and institutions to adopt it. But one of the things that puzzles me is, how do you explain that countries in Europe that do adopt IRA or put out strong statements against anti-Semitism still through the EU fail to support Israel, work against Israel by funding NGOs which are hostile to Israel, and at the United Nations we don't see these same countries standing up for Israel? How do you explain this duplicit behavior?
Yes. So we need to understand a little bit how the EU function. And let's begin with the fact that the top of the pyramid at the European level is dedicated and committed to combat anti-Semitism. They also declare the Jewish life an integral part of European identity, and they do it very well. And as I said before, the European Commission Office of Combating Anti-Semitism and Fostering Jewish Life, led by Katharina von Schneubein, I think that most of the people here are aware who is she, have done an incredible job in raising awareness and pushing the adoption of the IRA definition. The office has adopted a comprehensive strategy, I think that's at the beginning of 2021, to help member states to stand up and lead national strategy to combat anti-Semitism. So things are changing from the European level to the national level as well. And what we also see is the fact that the European governments in general have a huge and complicated bureaucracy. All the offices within the EU do not cooperate properly. So when we see the European Commission and different departments in the European Commission doing the right thing, not all the departments are answering the same call. This is one problem that we see. They are also growing. And recognition of the danger that we see of anti-Zionism as the new anti-Semitism in Europe. They say it, European leaders are recognizing that. And then we see an impact on the funding that are going to the Palestinian Authority. That's a big change that we have seen in the past 5-10 years that we never saw before. And that's very important to see the change. And I will recognize a fantastic organization that I hope you should host, if you didn't host already in your programs, NGO Monitor. NGO Monitor has been key to the change in the European Union to expose how the relationship between Palestinian groups and the ties they have with terrorist group. The fact that they were able to put on the table this information that no one, and that's the first problem that we have seen, was looking for. When Palestinian groups were coming to European Union, to European state, they asked for money, they receive it without being asked or questioned
Right.
where the money will go and what will happen. At the moment that it was exposed, countries that usually vote against Israel have stopped funding the Palestinian authorities or different parts of the organization. Like Norway. Norway is not a friendly country to Israel, but once the information was exposed publicly, sent to different decision makers in European countries, they had to stop because they were under pressure of the European Union, different organizations who put them under pressure, and things are changing. What do we see? If you look at the top of the pyramid, European Union today don't, and it's very difficult to get money from them to Palestinian NGOs. They don't give, they need to open their books to prove where the money goes. They donate money only to projects and not to organizations so they can see the result of the project, which is a change that I must say the NGO monitor groups did. And they deserve a lot of credit. What we cannot control now is the desire of independent countries to still continue to support NGOs. This is why we need more work to expose the lie. Technically, NGO monitor shouldn't exist. A country that gives money should do the work for themselves. They don't do it well. But right now, we see a lot of change, even in the curriculum programs of the Palestinian Authority, if they want to continue to receive money. Another very important change was the change that Nikki Haley established at the UN as the US ambassador in the UN. She stopped and she changed the paradigm that everyone needs to support the Palestinian people without asking questions. She stopped this paradigm. She began to ask questions to stop the flow of money. Things have been changed. The Palestinians are today need to prove the need of the money to be able to receive it. And that's an important change that I couldn't say this word 2 years ago. Honestly, I think that is very important to recognize this change today. The previous administration in the US did a fantastic job to control the flow of the money, to know where it goes. There are still a lot of change to be done. Now, speaking about the UN is a very complicated body. There is not a black and white answer. Um, Again, we need to recognize the work of Nikki Haley, but speaking about the UN and the vote against Israel, a lot of European countries are voting in favor of Israel many times. You can look at the Czech Republics, other countries that are favoring Israel. Denmark, for example, also sometimes can vote in favor of Israel. We still see a lot of abstention vote. That is a message of we are not against, we are not in favor. We don't want even to express ourselves about this thing because we know that it's a political game. But the way that the UN is built on voting blocks, an agreement between groups. So you have the Arab states nations bloc that's voting all together. This is why you see this automatically 50 votes against Israel from the Arab nations. Then we have a bloc that is completely today destruct, which is the African bloc. You have a lot of African countries voting for Israel, while the bloc decide to vote against Israel, which is also an interesting paradigm. So you see that things are changing. I believe that the Abrahamic Accord will change all what we have learned about the UN in the past 50 years, since even more than 50 years, just because some of the Arab states are today's friends of Israel. So things will change. Obviously, the blocs have allies. So you have the Arab states allies with Russia, Russia allies with China sometimes. So all these blocs are voting together. The relationship between the allies and Europe is also in alliances with the Arab states. So sometimes they don't know who to vote because they want to be in a business relations with Israel, and they also want to be in a business relation with some Arab states that are boycotting Israel. So they prefer to abstain. So the UN is one of the most complicated body. I think that it has proved itself that is not so relevant, that the world can deal with major problems without the UN. The COVID-19 pandemic, honestly, was handled by countries and not by international bodies. The European Union also is suffering today for not being able to distribute the vaccine across Europe properly. So we see that these major bodies that need to reach a point of crisis, they don't know how to be used. So it's a lot of places where people can talk, spend a lot of money and spend time, but the real things are happening outside of the UN. So it's very sad that an organization like the UN is not serious like it should be. It should be used to create peace, to create prosperity, to bring nations together, but it has been hijacked to divide between nations, and that's very sad.
I would totally agree. I'm cynical enough to think that the UN has lost its purpose and that many of the countries are duplicitous because it's a convenience. They do know the facts. They've known for a long time. NGO Monitor is fabulous, and a lot of the information they brought forward has been known. I think the difference is that they're exposing it and embarrassing these governments by publicizing it. The big difference is people on the ground now also know what NGO knows, what NGO Monitor knows, and what the governments know. Bureaucrats have known. They just, I mean, look at Canada. Canada has all the information it needs to know that UNRWA should not be funded. And now we fund it. Is that not also true among European countries? Are they not also giving money to UNRWA?
So allow me just to react first of all to something about the UN, because it's important to understand UN is not controlled by the UN staff. So the UN Secretary General today speaks about anti-Semitism, about anti-Zionism, is a fantastic leader. The Director General of UNESCO, Audrey Azoulay, for example, she's a fantastic leader. But the UN is controlled by the member states at the end of the day. They put decision on the table and they vote. So the UN people win, some of them, and not all of them. Today, at least the leaderships are fantastic. The UN Secretary General has appointed for the first time in the history a focal point on anti-Semitism, Moratinos, that is being handled to guide the UN how to deal with anti-Semitism on all the level, inside and outside. So things are happening. The fact that UNESCO, by the way, receive a very generous budget from Canada to help on Holocaust education is very important. And that's many things that the world doesn't know because we see what member states are doing. So the organization themselves try to do a good job. The member state, it's totally different because of the voting system that you need to understand. I think that I forget your question by
No, that's okay. I was just commenting that I think there is a miss between what is said at the political level and how the votes take place. I was just making that point. And I think that often the information is in front of people and they choose to dismiss it. And the only explanation is simply anti-Semitism. They carry these attitudes and then that's what plays out.
It's anti-Semitism, a lot of political pressure from outside that they're receiving because they need also the oil to make the economy function. They need to balance between who they support, and this is a big problem. Sometimes we forgot that Israel, at the end of the day, is a minority country, as a country in the Middle East, with more than 70 million Arabs surrounding Israel, and the paradigm of Israel being the Goliath, and then David has changed, and this is the problem. Israel is still a minority. The fact that we had to struggle so hardly to build a strong army, to build a strong economy, a strong identity, and strong everything is because we are still a minority countries. If today other Arab states around the world decide to destruct Israel, they can succeed. And we need to never forget that. We are still a small country.
Right. Yes. And that's true in the countries, as you described. The tiny percentage of Jews in any European country speaks to that as well. If you've got 11 million Muslims against, what is it, a few dozen, 30,000 or maybe 600,000 Jews, it's a very disproportionate. So I can understand that. You spoke also about how the leadership at the EU has changed and how NGO Monitor has influenced that. But is it not also true that the EU is still funding the building of Arab homes in lands that are designated Israeli in Area C in Israel?
I'm not aware exactly all the funding, where they goes and how they're being handled. But there is still a problem of funding that needs to be addressed, needs to be analyzed, needs to be answered. I just know that a lot of efforts have been done to change that, both from the funding countries that wants to control where the money goes, maybe just because of bad PR, they don't want to be badly in the press about that. That's one of the reasons. It's not a good reason. You should do that because you believe in your cause. Some other countries see that things are changing. I think at the end of the day, the pressure that Jewish organizations, the Israeli diplomacy has been doing to really show the world what Israel does has a lot of impact. Is not enough because the other side is also working very hard. They wake up in the morning to delegitimize the state of
Right.
Israel every day, and this is the only work. When I was in the Israeli army, I was always saying, our work is to be a professional army. Their work is to be a professional PR company. And we had a small staff dealing with the PR image of the Israeli Defense Force.
Right.
My work was to reflect what the army does and not to reflect another reality. We have an enemy that the work that they do is not to take care of being a professional army, to being an advanced country, to delegitimize Israel. In one day, maybe Israel will disappear and then they can control something. And this is a difference where we invest the time and the energy. I think that Jews also, you see, they try to invest their life in building their own life, their own family, their career, their businesses, or their dreams. They don't fight for their identity every day. They don't go and they don't do the work I'm doing. I'm doing that every day. This is my job. But we have enemies that they wake up in the morning. They don't really care about their career, about their life. They want really to spread hatred against Jews. And this is a difference of where people invested their time and their energy. And this is why we're in a minority also that combat for itself.
No, I totally get that. And I think a lot of money is on their side as well. I'll try to move to some of the positives then. I can appreciate what you're saying about the changes, and actually hearing you outline it makes me feel better, because as a mass, there's a lot more happening than just individual country decisions. One of the changes is within sports teams.
Yes.
Can you speak about why that's important? I know there are a number of football teams
Yes.
that have adopted IRA. What's all that about?
So that's a part of a bigger picture that is not on the sport team, is on the city level. This is why we like to work on this initiative of mayors. So many people around the world, they will identify Manchester as a football team and not as a city, Barcelona as a football team and not as a city. You have some university that's so well known that people know the name of the university, but they don't know the name of the city. So when you have cultural leaders like football team that are really taking a stand on something, it's so important. It helps changing mind. Football and soccer for US speakers in Europe is the most important thing. And when you have the football team of Chelsea that decide to adopt a definition of IRA and try to make a change, it is something that is very big. Chelsea is much more known than any other university. So as a connector, as a convener of hope, of messaging, it's critical. It's also a part of the strategy that Lord John Mann, the special advisor on anti-Semitism of the British government, has been implementing, understanding that to change and to make a change, it needs to work where people are being interested today. So people will watch more football games than any type of documentary on anti-Semitism, on the Jews. So if you can go where people are, it will be much easier to convene new ideology and new ideas. So football is critical. Universities are critical, but they are all under the umbrella of working into a city. It's not a government, it's a city. And when a city when a football club like Chelsea is playing against another football club, it's also national, but it's also international. These football clubs are playing on European level, on international level, and they bring all the supporters with them. Chelsea, for example, has 100 million fans on social media. We spoke about the Remember campaign. They all the sign for remembering the Holocaust to 100 million people. So it's a big message. So working with football team can impact the world much more than working with high-level policymakers that people are not really big fan of them. So you look at the following online and you understand with who you need to work to change the state of mind of the society.
So the sports and entertainment world can serve as basically like an advertising arm for the message. That's the way you're describing it, right?
Definitely. We did last month, not 2 months ago on January 27, we launched a campaign with a TikTok star with 40 million followers, Baby Ariel, that she put a statement against anti-Semitism for Holocaust remembrance. And I don't know if any one of you had the chance to go on TikTok, but it's not even my generation anymore. I don't understand what's happening there. But when you have someone with 40 million people, and this is what they like, this is what they want to hear, and they hear their follower, their star, and their person to speak, against anti-Semitism much more powerful than everything that we spoke about the UN, about the European Commission, about states, about change, because these are the young generation and they need to have support from people that they like and they love.
And since you're talking about online, maybe you could also speak about the difference between how online hate is being dealt with in Europe and in America.
Yeah. So we do that briefly because it's very simple. The legislation in Europe are much harder because of hate speech policies and the way that United States is handling freedom of speech and expression. In Europe, Holocaust denial, for example, in most of states like in France, in Germany, is against the law, against any legislations. So it's very easy to shut it down. In United States, it's different. So once you have strong legislation on a national level, then you can go and work with the companies to implement them. So the advantage of Europe is that the freedom of expression is much different understood and accepted in the society than other places. Also, Europe, let's not forget, is where hate speech lead to mass murder more than in other place in the world. So in Europe, they know that if they allow too many places for hate speech, something may happen because it happened in the past. So if you look at the legislation on social media, on online anti-Semitism, they are pretty hard in Europe compared to other places in the world. And then it allowed the European Commission, European Parliament to do a lot of legislation together with the countries and the companies to make a change. So you have a lot of legislation you can look at, like for how long a post, an anti-Semitic post can stay online before the company will need to pay a very hard price. That's one level. Holocaust denial in Germany, you're not going to find any Holocaust distortion or denial content in Germany as well in France. But there is a work that should be done. The legislation is strong, but then you have the civil society in Europe that is working very hard with money received by the government to monitor and then to provide the content to the country and to the companies. So the work is on the legislation, but also the implementation, but the implementation of the legislation is being written into the legislation. It's not done on its own. And that's something that is much different. United States usually is kind of the Europe is looking at United States a lot of time what to do and how to behave, but in this case, it should be the opposite way.
Nazi parades have been allowed in the US because under Amendment, First Amendment, it's your right to say whatever you like as long as you don't say you're going to kill anybody. So it would be very hard to get the kind of legislation, I would assume, very hard to get the legislation and support that you have in Europe.
But let's be clear. We had Nazi parade in Bulgaria, the Lukov March. For decades, it was happening. The Lukov is a collaborator with the Nazis regime. So you had all the neo-Nazis from Europe coming to Bulgaria to march every year. The Bulgarian government did a lot of work on the policy of hate speech to take this march down. The mayor of Sofia did a lot of work. So we had neo-Nazi march in many, many countries, mostly in the eastern side of Europe. But we saw 2 weeks ago in Madrid a neo-Nazi parade, also a small one. So it's happening in Europe. So I will not say that it's not happening, but when it's happening, they have more legal tools to stop them and to find those responsible and to end them. The problem that everything they're moving, Europe is a small continent. They're moving to the Eastern Europe, which is a bit different type of legislation. So because Europe have open borders where people can travel from side to side if they want to do a Nazi parade.
Can you say a little bit more then about what the cities are doing? I'm very interested in your summit for mayors that I think is global this year, yes? And what are some examples of cities that have really done a great job in addressing anti-Semitism?
So first of all, you're going to be invited, and I invite all of you to come to the summit next week. I think that you're going to learn exactly. I'm not a mayor, but I've been working with a lot of mayors, but I will take the example of Vienna. Vienna, first of all, has established the capital of Austria, has established a working group into the city hall of police officers, educators, legislators, and everyone that may impact the world of racism, hatred, anti-Semitism to work together on a monthly basis. They have a monthly meeting, they discuss, they implement the implementing program. And the first step they develop is let's speak about it internally on our level. Let's not forget the mayor is waking up in the morning to discuss how citizens are feeling, to feed them, to make sure they have water, the streets are clean, but the people are safe. So Vienna is a great example because they begin with a discussion and then they implement a project. Project they're implementing is places for all faith. All faith can come, can pray together, can meet each other. As a Belgian person, I never had the chance to sit with a Muslim person in Brussels, to meet, to discuss, to have a lunch, to celebrate one of our holidays together. So Vienna is implementing this kind of project. So we've seen also extremists coming to Vienna lately. So it's very sad, but they have a lot of projects. I think that in the world of post-trauma, we saw the mayor of Pittsburgh in the United States doing a fantastic job to rebuild the community, but to rebuild also the relationship between different faiths into the country. I think that's something that we're going to hear from him, which is great. The mayor of Athens that stand up to any type of defamation, hate speech against the Jewish community, that we will speak about the responsibility of a mayor and the public appearances that mayor can impact the citizens. So that will be also very important. On the other hand, how legislative tools can be used by a city to stop a neo-Nazi party that was growing in Athens. So it will be very interesting. The work that we do with mayor is divided on topics. One, prevention, how we can prevent from hate crimes. Then we have security and law enforcement that on the city level, which is much more different on other level. We have also interfaith relation, which is critical, and then post-trauma and reaction to hatred, to an anti-Semitic crime, because we need the mayors to be able to react to any type of crime. So we're going to discuss all of that. It will be very interesting. Mayor of Buenos Aires will come as well. So we have big cities, small cities that will all share the story. I think for the first time, we're going to have the three most important cities in the United States that have been victim of anti-Semitism in the past 2 years, with the mayor of Pittsburgh, of Poway, with the attack in the synagogue, and also from Muncie in New Jersey, that we've seen lately also an attack. And we will all speak about the reaction and how to heal the society.
I want to encourage everybody to register for your event, Sasha, because I watched your last summit and also the event you had from Albania, I believe it was.
Yes.
And they are fantastic, and it does bring the world closer together. People can see how one place can influence another. One of the things that Canadians should watch for is that I understand the mayor of Toronto, the largest city in Canada, Mayor John Tory, will participate, but we have not heard from him on the IRA, on the adoption of IRA. So I'm hoping that you're bringing him into this conference will help him to understand it's an important tool, and then we can help to make that the follow-up happen of getting IRA adopted. I hope that's on your agenda to
IRA is no. First of all, we are glad that the mayor of Toronto agreed to come and to share. It's an important city in Canada, but also in the world. IRA is always on our agenda. I think I spoke about it a lot here today as the first step in the first stage. And we're going to mention it a lot in this conference. And if I have a city that will adopt IRA, is much more important than the country because the city can then have implementation program in their schools with the police officers. Usually a city control the police forces so they can educate the police to recognize hate crime and then to punish hate crime properly. So yes, we hope that you will join, and he's not the only Canadian speaker. So you can
I'm pushing for people from Canada to participate, to listen in. And we're coming to a near close. There have been some questions I've tried to cover, and I would like to give you the opportunity, Sasha, to wrap up and tell everybody what can they do to be part of your movement. And also, I know that Combat Anti-Semitism has also been part of the movement called End Jew Hatred, which CAEF has launched in Canada, and we're looking for individuals who want to get involved. I don't know if you can just tell us how they differ, how you collaborate. What would you like people to do after they've heard your presentation today?
So I invite everyone to, first of all, to think what they want to do. I think that it's a matter of, if everyone can bring their own identity into this fight, it will be fantastic. We were working with people that have writing skills, that they have singing skills, that they know to write poems, and that they know to draw. So everyone can contribute into something. And I think that is a personal battle that we need to take upon ourselves. Someone are good writers, so I recommend them to write in their Facebook page, to write to newspaper, op-eds and everything. So just think about what you want to contribute in the fight, and then we can work with everyone. This is what we try to be. We don't want to tell someone what to do. We want to take someone that has a willing, as an idea, and then to work it with the person to implement. So we're very open in the way, and we do that because we don't have all the answers how to combat anti-Semitism, but we believe that bringing everyone ideas and skills, this is how things will change. So I invite everyone to join the movement by going on our website, combatantisemitism.org. You just can register there. You can go to see which type of activities we're offering. You can join them. We have contests sometimes that we're opening. We're opening very soon a new contest for everyone to join the fight against anti-Semitism. We have different programs that we are offering to everyone to join. And this is the first step. And if you're interested, then we work one-on-one with our team to really work with every person that would like to be engaged in this fight. To your question about NGO hatred, I think that I don't compare. I always say that we are small in numbers. So the more we have organization and groups coming together and try to really organize themselves, it's a good thing. So we are a member of NGO hatred as well. We are a proud member. They're a proud member of us. So we are very much open to new groups and new ideas. The only thing that we try to be is being an interfaith group, working with Muslims and Christians. We cannot work among Jews only. And we really, I think that last year we even worked with the Muslim War League to organize different campaigns to recognize the work of the Sheikh Mohammed Alisa that for the first time visited Auschwitz-Birkenau. We had a big celebration for him. So the work that we try to do is connecting between Jews, Muslim, and Christian a lot as one of the solutions.
Why, thank you for that. And I would encourage people to check out our website also, caef.ca. And if there's a way you'd like to be involved or support us, I would ask you to be in touch directly. It's just Andrea, ANDRI, at caef.ca. We'd also welcome your assistance. And as a lead organization, a partner with End Jew Hatred, our goal is to focus very much on specific instances of anti-Semitism in Canada and to take direct action. So it's possible for you to be involved at that level, as well as with Combat Anti-Semitism. I'd encourage you to go to their site and sign the pledge. And on that note, I want to thank you very much for your time, Sasha. I really appreciate it. And it's really been a pleasure working with you the last year and a half since you've been at the organization, and we wish you every success going forward. Thank you, everyone,
Thank you,
for
Andrea.
participating. And
Thank you, everyone.
Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.